over the last 2 years, kidnapping in the city, kidnapping for ransom specifically, has become a bigger and bigger thing. We have last week saw the kidnapping of an 8-year-old girl from Rylands. Yeah. Shocking. We have had people who've been held for 3 months, 6 months before being returned to their families upon payment of a ransom, which is disastrous because it teaches those syndicates to do more of the same. And we have new syndicates entering that space because you can see the MOs and the people operating are different. So it's additional syndicates entering this. And we know that it's linked to a Mozambican drug lord who has tendrils down here. And we understand now some of the underlying forces at work.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome again to WorldView. This is the #1 media company where we explore everyone's perspective on things that can broaden a worldview. Today, we're very delighted to be hosting Alderman JP Smith. I'll call him JP Smith or JP during the interview. He is the interim deputy leader of the DA, Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape. He's a councilor there. He's been a councilor for a number of years. He's also in the Mayoral Executive Committee of the Western Cape. He's responsible in his MEC position for safety and security in the Western Cape, a discussion that we cannot avoid to have, that we have to have, especially in this post-COVID era where things seem to be spinning in all directions, not just in the Western Cape, but throughout South Africa. JP Smith, welcome.
Morning, Sully.
Really happy to have you here. I have no idea where to start. I know I've been watching your career for a number of years, and I have to tell you that, so this is not going to be a sweetheart interview, but I have to start by saying I've always admired, that you've always been where the action is, and no matter what people have been saying, you've always been a straight talker, which is something I really appreciate in a politician, and who says, I'm going to be there, and you arrive. So not just at this interview, but wherever that's troubled in South Africa.
I do try and say it as truthfully as I understand it. Yeah. I think the public are tired of mealy-mouthed spin. They want frank answers. Sometimes those answers are not what people want to hear. You have to tell them things that you can't do or that don't work. And we're also not beyond admitting defect and failure. Right. No, we swing, we hit. Sometimes we miss. The only way you get to never do anything wrong is by doing nothing, right. Keeping your head below the battlements. And in safety and security space, things in South Africa have deteriorated in a number of ways. And so that has meant trying to tackle problems from new angles. Some of those have caused huge debate. Yeah. And I think that's part of what you want to talk about, things like the powers of local government versus that of national government.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that a little bit more. Let's go back a little bit to Cape Town. I mean, you were there, as I said earlier, for a number of years. When Patricia de Lille was mayor, there was the accusation that she had to place too much political power, taking away the administrative responsibilities into a political office and centralize the power in there. You might have read Crispin Olver's book, The House Divided, about all the mess in Cape Town, the role of what they call the construction mafia, the battles that you seem to have with Patricia de Lille around the Cape Town Stadium, with the changes making it more affordable. So what was happening? I mean, what damage, if any, has Patricia or did she do in the leadership of the Western Cape, and what are the things that happened that could have been avoided?
I think the characteristic of Patricia de Lille that caused the tension in our caucus, and I was the face for much of that, but I certainly wasn't the only one concerned, which is why within the caucus, when the caucus was asked whether we wanted to have a motion of no confidence, we voted with a 2/3 majority to agree to that motion of no confidence. Right. It was defeated in the council meeting because the opposition supported her to delay to extend our crisis. But the characteristic that I think that caused the most harm was a very strong belief that she had the answers to everything and the rest of us were irrelevant regardless of institutional knowledge experience or expertise. And this manifested in a series of ever larger centralizations of powers. A council runs on a thing called the delegations, the delegations document that spells out in the powers vested in local government, who in this building, who in this structure has what power and the ability to make what decision. And over time, she increasingly centralized those delegations under her. That was a major crisis. And it had a physical manifestation in the adoption of a thing called the ODTP, the organizational redesign of the structure. It was a massive restructuring of council and its systems. And it had a debilitating impact almost straight off the bat, much of which has since been undone. There are a few legacies left of it. Some of that last legacies were undone in January. And it had a hugely debilitating impact, which I think now is fairly widely acknowledged and accepted. But at the time, to have said that it was wrong or wasn't working was considered to be, was anathema. You were not allowed to raise objections. You were not allowed to criticize. And so over time, the conflict mounted.
But how do you, I mean, you know, former Deputy Chief Justice Dihama Seneke, he paid a price for it. He once made a comment about the national situation that we had placed too much powers in the office of the president. And that's why, and then we ended up with the Zuma. We thought everybody was going to be like Mandela. So if you come back to Cape Town, the Western Cape Town particularly, what happens if another Patricia de Lille comes in? Do you have you guys managed to place checks and balances that will ensure nobody ever gets to do that again?
So remember, the meltdown with Patricia de Lille didn't come because of the centralization of delegations. That was the foundation that was laid for things to go wrong later, to go less checked, unchecked. The meltdown came with the Foreshore Freeway tender and the BYD bus tender. Both very large tenders, the one of them running into the billions, where the auditors, the probity auditors and officials involved started raising the red flag saying, this tender has now been the subject of undue influence and interference by a specific senior official who the city subsequently attempted to dismiss and who later was rehired by Patricia de Lille when she became national minister. And when that conflict broke out, is really when things came to a head. And I think the lesson we learned out of this organizationally within the city and within the DA was precisely what, I mean, we may have paid lip service to before within the party, but allowed de Lille to change, and that is to erode those checks and balances, to make sure too much power does not vest with one person so that they're able to make unilateral decisions to, for instance, have sole control over who sues the city or when we defend ourselves against a lawsuit, so that when somebody wanted to change something in the city, they would take us to court. And in at least one case, where there was clear evidence, the mayor then blocked us from defending that matter, and there was a default judgment against the city. So devices and tools within the city were exploited by a leadership who had too much authority. And we have reverted now to a much healthier system of delegations and checks and balances. And when the next mayor came, Dan Plato, there was discussions among some of the people advising him to again revisit those delegations. And those of us who had been there for the de Lille saga pushed back hard against that, and they were not amended. The current mayor, Jordan Hill-Lewis, has not initiated any such conversations. But when he does, or if he does, my answer to him will be the same, that we may now be lucky to have a mayor for who those values are deeply ingrained. But you cannot guess what will happen in 6 months or a year's time or 2 years' time. And therefore, those checks and balances must remain. Even if they take you an extra day or few hours, it is important because the judgment of a single person is never infallible, absolutely myself included.
Definitely, but you need a lot more JP Smiths in there to ensure that, you know, the thing that happens in politics is that somebody comes in, we tend to place these people on pedestals. We almost fear them, we celebrate them, and then somebody comes in with and makes those decisions. JP Smith is no longer there to say, wait a minute, you can't do that because we've been there before. Everybody like sits there and it happens again. So there'll always be need for somebody in there to have the understanding of where things came from, what happened in the past, and to ensure that whatever happens, if anybody tries it again, they will stand up and say, you can't, because this is what happened when that happened.
You need a system of antibodies. Your body corporate needs an immune system.
Right.
Our immune system got tested. The body got very sick, but we survived.
Okay.
There are other immune systems in this country that have been very publicly tested and have failed. And I suppose it depends on how vociferous the body's immune system is, how willing some people are to speak out. Because at the time when you do, you are branded as a spoiler, as depending on the circumstances, a racist, as being disloyal. I had a businessman who called me and said to me, "Shame on you for speaking out against the mayor. How dare you?" And I said, "I'm not speaking out against the mayor." He said, "She's your employer. You owe her loyalty." I said, "I'm not speaking out against the mayor. I'm speaking up for the city. There is a bigger cause than the interest of that one person. There is a broader matter here." But I will tell you, I've been now in scraps over the years where you have been almost sure what you are doing is career ending. You have known, I've had my finger hovering over a button to click send for 4 hours, going back and forth to the laptop, deciding whether I'm going to send that email, because 50 people have told me, if you send that email, consider your career terminated. And then you just understand, well, these are the things I have to do. And that doesn't always make you popular with everyone. But I suppose that I continue to win elections internally in the party, suggests that some people do value that commitment to try and get procedural correctness and integrity in systems.
But Patricia de Lille, for some reason, there are still people out there who believe that she left because she's black. I don't know how many times you say it, and how the DA overcomes this thing that each time somebody goes who is not white, it's because they are black or they are not white. I mean, how do you guys deal with this sort of thing?
We take disciplinary action against people who are not black as well. But of course, that is not accompanied by the same narrative. All I've learned to do is to deal with the facts, not play the victim, not allow other people to play the victim, just try and boil it down to the fact. As our mayor said in a meeting last week with external stakeholders, where one particular lady played these kind of cards, he said to her, "Ma'am, in order to resolve these kind of things, we need to reduce it to the simple facts and test those facts." Playing the victim and these kind of broader narratives doesn't aid us at all. That's all you can do in an organization like this, because almost 5 million people depend on this, the city functioning well, and not allowing systems to be hijacked or captured or to be used in the service of people whose agendas are less than honorable. Any big organization, and every party is subject to this. The DA is absolutely not immune to it. There's no political party that over time will not have persons who will test the integrity of the system. It is sometimes very hard to speak out.
So let's fast forward to today and to your portfolio. You released this amazing program recently, drones, sensors, cameras on new cars and up in the air. You said, and the mayor said there's going to be surveillance 24/7. Tell us a bit more about that.
So technology isn't the only plank in the sort of raft of interventions that we're trying to build around safety. It is the one that gets the most interest, because I think it's the most savvy, it's the most exciting. But there are a couple of key elements in what we're doing. The first has just been gradual resource growth. We've grown the resources very significantly, most recently in conjunction with the provincial government. They have supplied us or supported the funding of a further 1,300 officers we've deployed in the 13 worst hotspots in the city, crime hotspots that generate the most serious violent crime. And we've seen a very attractive trend of quarter-on-quarter reduction in the crime stats on all of this. That's not rocket science, nor is it very surprising. If you add 100 officers to a police precinct, it is going to have a positive impact. So resources is the first thing. The second thing is information-driven or intelligence-driven policing, because if all those people are just walking up and down the streets mindlessly, they will reach a certain plateau of competency or impact, and then the criminals will start outmaneuvering them. We are already seeing that in some of the so-called leap areas, these priority stations, Where our impact is slowing down, it's because criminals are getting more clever. They no longer carry the firearms on them. They will hide a firearm somewhere and go and get it right before they intend to mug someone. So the constant stop and searches has changed criminal behavior. We see that specifically in Yanga and Harare. And so you need to constantly adapt, but you also need to be driven by information and investigations. So we've rolled out investigators and we've rolled out information management service. Let's not call it crime intelligence, because those are the subjects of very big fights with national government around what our competency is. We have legal opinion that says, while we are not explicitly enabled to gather information and manage it and to do investigations, we're also not explicitly prohibited. So we are testing these, we're pushing the boundary on that.
It's a legal lacuna, it's called, or judicial lacuna, sorry.
Absolutely. So the national, the legislation that governs intelligence nationally says that we must stay out of international intelligence, foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, but nothing stops us from managing crime intelligence. It's not explicitly prohibited in the Act. And so we generally err on the side of action with everything. In the same way, we established a law enforcement reservist service. We're the only city in South Africa that has a police reserve service in the city within our law enforcement department, because this national government has over time completely disinvested in the police reservist service nationally. We've crashed from over 12,000 police reservists in the Western Cape in SAPS to, I think, less than 800. So we've tried to compensate for that, but there's nothing in law that specifically enables it. So we've had to work around that. In fact, a former police commissioner did his darndest to try and block us from establishing it, coming up with all manner of impediment. And
why? Why would he want to stop you from doing it? I mean, what has he got to gain?
We suffered an 11-month delay in struggling with this person to get him to consent and to do the criminal record screening of the officers. So with each one of these boundaries that we've pushed, be it the gang and drug task team that we established, when we established specialized units to deal with gangsters the first time, there was huge pushback. Our officers got arrested. When they went to SAPS to get search warrants, there were circulars issued that said, don't give search warrants to Metro Police. When we arrested a gangster, we were forced to go stand in the queue in the community service center with that gangster, with the members of the public. When we then approached the courts to circumvent those police stations that were blocking us, approach was made to the courts by one or two senior SAPS members to block us from getting.
But why do they do that? Do you think they're getting instructions from the center, from the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele? I mean, why would police stop you from doing something that would eventually have them reduce levels of crime? It doesn't make sense to me.
I think there's two things that inform that. The one is the sort of psychology of fiefdom, of turf protection. This is our domain. These are our powers. You're intruding. And the second one is perhaps perhaps political, in that there are many senior members deployed in the National Police Service who are very political. They are more politician than policemen. And over time, their internal politicking has, in fact, contributed significantly to the challenges that SAPS are currently in that the constant politicking internally, the massive political strife and conflict with these very politicized individuals has torn deep holes in that organization. And that's not my opinion. You can go onto the internet and just search. And within 5 minutes, you will find 100 headlines outlining these massive and deep internal strifes. And unfortunately, that reaches all the way into crime intelligence, which in South Africa over the last decade and a half has been severely impaired, and I would say crippled, to the point that organized crime syndicates are very much flourishing now in the absence of effective crime intelligence. I said that was the second plank, was crime intelligence. The third one was improved training. We've invested massively in our training college. We've expanded the number of training colleges. We're buying simulators. We've invested another 15 million in the beginning of this year in expanding our trainers, and enhancing the college, getting all kinds of accreditation and even international accreditation for courses, bringing in international expertise from the UK and the US and everywhere else to help us. Most recently, with the kidnapping and extortion syndicates that are running rife in South Africa. And whilst the Western Cape doesn't have the level of crisis Gauteng has, we are on our way, sad to say, and we are trying very hard to turn around on this road. And technology has been one of those planks that we've invested in. And most recently, that includes CCTV cameras, which we're augmenting with another 56% this year. Using analytics is the new part of that, automated number plate recognition, but also facial recognition, specifically at static points like bus stations and other stuff, which we've started to experiment with. We own the own technology. The drones, we have 6 certified drones. We have certified pilots. We're waiting for our ROC, our operations manual, to be approved by the Civil Aviation Authority. It's a very slow and over-regulated process, Section 101 of the Civil Aviation Act, but we're getting there. We should be very early in the new year. Those drones should be going. In the meantime, we're using the drones of a contractor, and we use them in the Marikana operation. We've used it in the Wynberg operation. We're now constantly using it in fires, disaster management, traffic management, very useful. And then we're evolving that one level up, both through the gunfire detection, shot spotter, which we're using. Tender is now done. It is currently being installed. That listens to crime, triangulates the source of a gunshot to within 2 to 10 meters of accuracy, which increases by about 5-fold our firearm recovery, because we can very rapidly go to the exact spot of a gunshot. It also gives you a whole lot of crime intelligence about what time, where, and how they're happening. Okay. And then, of course, the Eye in the Sky, which is a little 2-seater plane with a massive camera rig underneath it, which we put up in the air, which helps us support operations. So on a gang operation the other night, we had the mayor in the control room, and the officers on the ground were seeing it in Hanover Park. The mayor was seeing it in the control room in Goodwood. And this, as the Metro Police vehicles stop in front of the house and the criminals then start, the gangsters climb over the fence into the neighbor's yard and try and sneak out that way. We could see them go, and we could send the vehicle around the side to intercept them.
Okay, two questions, JP. One, a friend of mine once took me around Cape Town. He said, this area is controlled by this Israeli mafia. This one is controlled by the Russian mafia. These are the local guys, and they know one another's turfs. I know that you guys have this problem with getting you always in your public appearances always give credit to the fact that you collaborate with SAPS, which is good. I don't know if you say that for political reasons to be nice to them, or if the bigger part of you is really frustrated by the fact that you keep being blocked. But it seems to me that Cape Town has been divided, and I hope it's wrong, that into turfs by different groups. Some of them are foreign to. Do you know that? Are you sitting there saying, we know these people are here, we know what they're doing, we know who's pushing the drugs, and we know who owns this restaurant here and this offensive nightclub over there, but we can't go after them because we don't have the powers? Is there such a thing?
So a little bit, yes. So let's start with the relationship with SAPS.
Yeah.
I would say at the moment we have the best relationship with SAPS that we've ever had.
Okay.
We have a remarkably good relationship. We've got a very good provincial commissioner, works very closely with us. I will give it to the provincial commissioner, Patricia de Lille. He's a no politics guy. He just wants to get on with the job, and it's a real pleasure to work with him. And we have an extremely good relationship at grassroots level with the stations, where we have the LEAP staff deployed. Often they are on parade in the morning with the SAPS members. The station commissioner is briefing them, or the Vispol head is briefing them. They are working very closely, and but that's a hit and miss affair. It works at most stations. There are a couple of stations that are distinct problems where the relationship is not good. So that's very much subject to personalities at the local station.
But just a minute, can't the police, the local commissioner who is working very well with you, give instructions to these police stations that are giving you trouble, to tell them to stand down, as it were?
Yes, I mean, sometimes it's just a reticence. We had one station, for instance, we had all of our analysts in my office 2 days ago. We were looking at the statistics of the LEAP stations. Where are we continuing to make improvements? Where have we slowed down? What is the reason for the slowdown? Where are we not getting effective arrests? Are our arrests following through to convictions, or are those cases being thrown out? And some very worrying statistics amongst that, which we are very much focusing on and engaging SAPS on. With cases withdrawn in certain cases, where we have to go and ask, well, exactly what was the reason for this case withdrawn, which is why we've rolled out all these investigators, 40 investigators across the city as part of our Safety and Security Investigations Unit, what Bheki Cele calls the Rogue Unit. We'll own the title. If I have to go rogue to protect the public, then rogue it is. And so they are doing watching briefs on our cases, trying to work with those local investigators who are horribly overloaded. And you're sitting with 200, 250, 300 cases per detective. There's no reasonable chance of them coping with it. They can do 15 to 25 cases.
Right.
200 cases is justice denied for 175 of those. But the relationship is very solid on the ground. Our watching briefs work well. There are here and there's a station that doesn't work. Now, one particular one recently had a station commissioner change. The previous station commissioner saw our staff as an extension of his own and worked very closely with us. I remember standing with him in front of his police station. I'm going to be a little bit non-specific now about which one, so as not to cause him trouble, and him saying, I can't do this without your staff. They are working so brilliantly with us. Look there, 6 of your guys are going out with 1 of mine. My guys utilizing his powers, your guys are the force multiplier. I wouldn't be able to do that operation, but for those members that are going out. I went on that night with them, and we made a big drug arrest in one of the informal settlements around Guguletu. So that works well. But when that person left that station recently, got promoted, the station took an immediate downturn in operations. Immediately, the new station.
There was no hand over to the new guy by the old one. Citizen, this is how we've been working here.
Totally different approach, operational approach by the new person. Uses our staff largely for vehicle checkpoints. All he wants them to do is stand and do vehicle checkpoints on certain roads that are not the right roads. So last night we discussed, well, should we stop listening to this guy? Should we ask our staff to ignore his requests because he's not in command of them? But do we disconnect ourselves from that partnership a little bit, do what we know needs to be done, go back to focusing on where we can see the crime threat is.
Right.
And so much of that intelligence-driven approach is about being able to accurately determine crime threats. And that's obviously at a very local grassroots level, looking at crime stats, etc. And keep in mind, we don't get crime stats from SAPS. We rely on the service requests the members of the public give us, what we pick up at the Station Crime Combating Forum, what the community members give us, what informants tell us, what our officers detect themselves. SAPS really pull the rug out from under all your metro police forces across the country by not having an effective real-time access to crime data. But that's a battle for a different day. That same problem exists further up at a macro level as well, where you get to serious organized crime, where you have syndicates, some of them transnational, some of them with links to other African countries like Mozambique and Nigeria, some of them linked to Pakistan and China, some of them linked to Russia, as you say.
Do you know where they are? Do you know where they're sitting? Do you know which businesses are being to launder their money? Are your hands tied because of the relationship with National?
No, I think increasingly we do know. The short answer is yes. Increasingly, we have a sharpening picture. The focus it's coming into focus more and more for us as we do more and more information gathering and management. As we manage informants more, we have an ever-expanding network of informants. As our specialized units become sharper, as the systems to debrief them become better, as the crime analysts we appointed become more thorough, as the CCTV footage we collect is harvested more continuously for data and information, and as that information is cross-referenced with other information by the analyst and by the investigators, and is more effectively used by our specialized units.
Right.
Where we struggle at the moment is this barrier that may be more customary than legal, which says that the city may not run investigations and manage crime intelligence. When we do, some sources within the police push back very hard. Now, a simple example. Over the last 2 years, kidnapping in the city, kidnapping for ransom specifically, has become a bigger and bigger thing. We have last week saw the kidnapping of an 8-year-old girl from Rylands. Yeah. Shocking. We have had people who've been held for 3 months, 6 months before being returned to their families upon payment of a ransom, which is disastrous because it teaches those syndicates to do more of the same. And we have new syndicates entering that space because you can see the MOs and the people operating are different. So it's additional syndicates entering this, and we know that it's linked to a Mozambican drug lord who has tendrils down here. And we understand now some of the underlying forces at work and a little bit of who's doing what. National government, we approached the national minister to say we want to be part of this kidnapping and extortion task force, create an interdisciplinary kidnapping and extortion task force between provincial government, city, national government, bring in all the agencies, have the NPA and SAPS and everybody working on this together with us. We sit on a lot of information, business partner information in terms of our residents, our ratepayers information. We sit on a lot of data from business licenses, traffic fines, all kinds of things that people make, which leaves behind an information trail, which should be working in the interest of crime intelligence, and which is not. And the National Commissioner paid lip service to that. I posted these letter on my Facebook page in which he said, yes, we will do so. We accept your offer, we will do it. That's right after the very public meeting, very well televised meeting with the Muslim Judicial Council, where they put the National Minister, Bheki, Cele, on the spot. And I think there really was no space for him to say, no, we will not work with the city. That was, 2 months or more ago. Since then, said task force has not been established. And we are in weekly attempts to resolve these matters. And at the moment, all we've gotten back for the last 2 months is mandate. Explain to us how your mandate's not adequate. Then we send legal opinions. This is not what we want. Then we send standard operating procedures. So we actually can't figure out what it is that they want from us to be able to say, okay, let's start to work together on this. We've agreed to sign non-disclosures. We've agreed to second staff to work in their premises. It's very frustrating, and it's not in the broader public interest. And so if you ask me, why are we not able to deal with major syndicates? It is because those competencies sit, those investigative and prosecutorial competencies and the running of the Department of Justice all sits in the hands of national government. Neither the city nor the provincial government have powers in that space, have authority in that space. We are dependent on a criminal justice system that sits out of our control, starting with the investigating power of SAPS. We are slowly but surely inserting ourselves forcibly into that space. And the day will very soon come when we will be starting to go to the NPA directly with cases, with prosecution-ready cases, and say, now explain to us why this cannot be prosecuted.
Yeah, if devolution, there's a lot of talk now. There's a devolution group, or I don't know the exact formal name of it in Cape Town. If part of the devolution concerning your area were to happen, you'd obviously be able to solve those things. You'd obviously be able to having identified where these people sit, the head of the syndicate, because a lot of times the rich guys enjoy their wealthy life in Constantia or in Sea Point, in Bantry Bay, in Thames Bay, but the trouble happens in the township. It happens in Khayelitsha, in Michelle's Plain, in those areas. That's where the little the runners, go around getting shot and being killed. But the guys who are really making the money are not being touched, and that's a big problem. So those big guys are the ones where you are not able to reach because the nation is not allowing you to, is it?
Well, it's because the powers are defined to belong to SAPS. Those investigating powers belong to SAPS, the Hawks, the anti-gang unit, etc. They are not effective in achieving convictions. If we look at a thing like gang murders across the city, gang murders contribute just on half of all of our murders. Half. Take gang murders out of the equation. Cape Town drops out of the race for most violent city in South Africa completely, and we drop out of that horrible international top 20 that keeps on being formulated every year. We disappear from that equation. Gang violence roots us in that misery and in that trauma for our community. And you will not make progress until you improve the convictions. If the people who pull the trigger are able to continue running on the streets, pulling the trigger, nothing will change. And there your conviction rate is less than 2%. It's less than 2%. Wow. In any other system, when you speak to a district attorney from the US, or you speak to similar people in Europe or elsewhere, they tell you if they had a 2% or lower conviction rate for murders like that, then heads would roll, departments would get turfed out. There would be massive sea changes. In the UK, you would have a commission of inquiry by the Home Office. Massive changes would be effected, but not here. Yeah, we've just had to learn to live with it.
Is it because you're a DA? I mean, why is there such a pushback or refusal to give you the powers that people know you have the capacity to implement effectively for the residents of Cape Town if you had the powers? Is it political?
No, the criminal justice system is failing. The criminal justice system is failing across South Africa. The difference is that gang violence is within that category of organized and syndicated crime. Metal theft, trafficking, the drug trade, the firearms trade, your taxi violence, your taxi bosses, which effectively, because of how the legislation enshrines them, have become mafiosos of their own syndicates. Your organized crime syndicates within your nighttime and protection rackets, and now increasingly in the kidnapping space. These are organized crimes, and their existence needs to be met by an organized response, by an organized specialist prosecutors within specialized units with access to special technology and priority systems. They need to be well resourced, and they need to be able to work unfettered to go after these syndicates. That national government does not have the ability to create. And that absence of that leads to these paltry or non-existent conviction rates, so that these criminals are becoming more prosperous, more deeply ingrained, or buying more cops, buying more judges, capturing more of the state apparatus. And eventually South Africa is going to be in a very, very dangerous and bad space. We are wandering further and further down this road. And national government does not appear to have the apparatus, the understanding, the skill, the insight, the ability, the willingness to reverse this course urgently and rapidly. Prioritize the deployment of detectives. We know we need at least 8,600 detectives. There's a massive shortage. Prioritize that low-hanging fruit. Make it happen. Fix your forensic pathology labs. You cannot have results that take 6 to 9 months or 12 months to come back to a pathologist, who then cannot complete his forensic pathology report for the detective within 6 months or 9 months or longer, because he's waiting for results. Then you will have the failure to solve crimes. You will have the failure of the criminal justice system. So the problems are not mysterious. They're known and understood problems, but they're never fixed. And so either people don't know how to fix them, or they have an interest in not fixing them.
Which is the problem. So do you find, from a PR perspective, JP, you are accountable to the people of Cape Town, to the residents of the Western Cape or the Cape Town. Do you find yourself having to explain to them that there are certain things you're not able to do because of these frustrations with the national, and appearing to be just giving excuses for refusing to do your work or being unable to do your work?
So for a long time, we were trapped in that space of going to public meetings, putting up a slide on a projector and saying, this is how the powers work. This is what we can do, traffic and bylaw enforcement. This is our core constitutional domain. Crime prevention is ancillary to that, but we do have the ability to do crime prevention. But this is the limitations of our resources. In Cape Town, our resources are around a 20th or a 30th of that of SAPS, depending on which SAPS members you include as part of the resources in the city. Because a lot of the resources here are involved in parliamentary and VIP protection, and they really shouldn't be counted to the operational quota. So we used to do that a lot. And the public are very intolerant of that kind of answer. So increasingly under pressure, we have stepped deeper and deeper into the crime prevention space with metal theft enforcement, liquor enforcement, gang enforcement, marine enforcement. There's a strong linkages between the marine poaching and the drug trade and the gangs. So increasingly, we're stepping into more and more spaces like rail enforcement and other stuff that's not our business. That is the mandate and core mandate of national government. But where through non-delivery, we are compelled to step in. Now, through the Gang and Drug Task Team and LEAP, I would say around 2/3 of all of our policing resources in the city is focusing on violent crime, which is the opposite of our core constitutional mandate, which is the far less exciting, but still very important bylaw and traffic enforcement, in which when we cease to do it, ceases to be done. Whereas if we're not doing SAPS's job, it is still the job of SAPS. But that's the reality, is that we now do a lot of national government's job because it does not look like they're going to be able to competently do that anytime soon. And in fact, they are shedding resources, not gaining resources. They're shedding both institutional capacity. There's a massive drain constantly in SAPS. They're losing their best people who are finding other spaces to go and work. I speak to them every week. They often approach us to come and try and work here. And they're also losing actual numbers. So there's a net attrition in SAPS. And in fact, so that's as a result of a decision to cut the national budget. There has been a massive budget cuts, which is shedding some 26,000 SAPS members nationally at the moment.
I mean, there seems to be a cordial relationship between Premier Alan Winde and Ramaphosa. He seems to have a direct line to Ramaphosa. Surely, maybe he could call Ramaphosa to say, can you do something about this? Speak to Bheki Cele, because you can listen to me, he might listen to you. Don't you try and use those behind the scenes political links to help, make things easier?
I think it's a universal mystery to all of us why Minister Cele continues to remain in that post. When you speak to his own colleagues in his party in different parts of the country, they understand that he's doing a disservice to that space. But he seems to be immovable. So there's obviously some internal ANC political reason, and we reasonably understand what that is, that he is immovable, notwithstanding the very problematic history he has when he was National Commissioner. But that's as it is. That's a call the ANC and the state president make to keep him there. there are other people they could put there who would work with us and who would build a relationship of partnership and collegiality aimed at the common good of fighting the criminals and not each other. But at the moment, that is not the ethos that Cele advocates and shouts from every stage at every opportunity. It creates a more and more divisive space.
That's
Luckily
very sad.
for him,
That's very
luckily
sad.
for us, everything beneath the minister reasonably ignores what he says and works very closely with whatever partners they can get.
Don't
So
say
you're
that.
very
Don't say that too loudly.
Well, there's a reasonable amount of politics,
right.
But as soon as you get further down the ranks, the staff, the station commissioners, many of your specialized heads, their only pressure is from members of the public who are summoning them to public meetings, who are calling them, who are texting them to say, here is my dead child. What are you doing about this? Here is the shooting in Khayelitsha, this mass shooting. All these people were shot dead in this place because of extortion rackets. What are you doing about this? They are embracing whatever partnership they can, whether it's neighborhood watches or working with the ward councillors or working with the city. And so luckily, the commitment to partnership does work at grassroots level. Where it needs to work, if we are going to tackle the syndicates and your major organized crime figures, is however, and unfortunately further up the food chain at provincial SAPS level and at national level, where the attitude towards partnership and empowering your provinces and your metros is going to have to change. And the easiest way to do that is for the minister to invoke section 99, subsection 1 of the Constitution that allows him to transfer power to provinces or cities who are able, so that we can start doing one of two things. Either A, running the police directly, or B, which is going to be the more likely outcome in that he's never going to relinquish control of SAPS easily, is to grant us additional powers in terms of the Constitution, in terms of the Police Services Act, for us to proceed to take up more and more of that role and see what results we are able to generate.
But you
Leap is an example of how we're doing that.
You're doing that with the trains, aren't you? Isn't the metro rail in Cape Town now being run by you guys, or do you have more powers now than you did before, so that we're able to control the levels of safety and security on the trains?
No, sadly not. We are in that process. We offered the PRASA a partnership where we and the city and the province would pay for law enforcement officers to work on their rail infrastructure. Internally, they have gone with a private security solution. That is their right. It is a mistake, but it is their right. It is how they got into this crisis in the first place, I would say. But the mayor, as you know, is pushing extremely hard for the city to take over the management of the rail function, in that no modern city anywhere in the world can function without a rail system. You cannot move the millions of people who need to get back and forth across the city daily on your roads alone, and all those road journeys that have been displaced onto public roads from the cessation of many of your core lines, especially your central line in Cape Town that runs from the northwest to the southeast of the city. Most of that infrastructure is gone. The rails no longer exist on the ground. The rails are gone. The station platforms are gone. The infrastructure is gone. The overhead pylons and cabling is gone.
Some shacks have been built on tracks, or where they used to be tracks.
Shacks have been built on areas where PRASA refused to file trespassing cases when the trouble started, for fear of vandalism of their shunting gear, or at least that was the narrative at the time. So the net consequence is that PRASA commuter rail is severely incapacitated where you need it the most. That has displaced a lot of people onto the roads. We did recently see a case where a person who was prosecuted and found guilty in relation to the arson attacks on the trains, in his statement said that he was paid and hired by the taxi industry to cripple their competition. We see the same MO being applied to the city's bus service, IRT, the My City service, and specifically to GABS, the Golden Arrow bus service, which services the Metro Southeast, where it competes with the minibus taxi industry, and where a huge amount of...
Are these guys in control, the taxi people? Are they in control? I mean, are you guys, can you push back against them or not? Are they too powerful?
We're doing that exactly at the moment. That's why I am again getting death threats. And they are, we are pushing back in a number of ways. One, through the new traffic bylaw, which allows us to impound public transport vehicles for road traffic offences. 2, through the expansion of the pounds to take in those additional vehicles. 3, through the establishment of a taxi ghost squad, unmarked taxi enforcement vehicles that focus on driving behavior and arrests. And 4, through the very substantial enhancement of our traffic enforcement focus and impounding. When we have gone into a community like Nyanga, impounded Avanzas, or so-called Amapela, the response has been to violently attack our staff and golden arrow buses, burn out buses, etc. In the past, we would capitulate, withdraw in the interest of stopping the public violence, withdraw, and the taxis would get their way and the criminal actions would carry on unabated. A few months ago, we drew a line in the sand. My mayor backed me, and we drew a line in the sand. We operationalized a massive deployment in Nyanga. We took control of every single street and every single part of Nyanga, and we ensured that the public transport operations were able to go on unhindered and unfettered and unintimidated. And we impounded hundreds of the illegal taxis, notwithstanding threats and meetings and demands, and a meeting with the taxi bosses, where these same bosses arrive at the meeting with private security guards in balaclavas with assault rifles. I kid you not. And you're having to walk into a meeting unaccompanied.
They can do that?
Taxi boss arrives, yes, with private security guards who have been issued with assault rifles, wearing balaclavas, and walking around the taxi boss. So the situation is macabre. The problem is actually with national legislation. They need to be written out of the National Land Transportation Act. It is an intervention that national government knows needs to happen, but either through vested interest or lobbying or fear of assassination, because this is an industry that thinks of assassination as a legitimate business practice, as well documented in Mark Shaw's book, Man for Hire. The fear, the retaliation from the industry, I've decided that I'm going to say what needs to be said, and if they do stuff, they do stuff.
Yeah, I think, I have admiration for bravery. South Africa needs people like more people like you. I've always thought that way. But the thing is, there are always consequences.
My enemies would disagree, sir.
Well, I agree. I think that, okay, and here's the thing. I want to bring you, and I know the operation that you guys ran in Winde a few weeks ago, which was laudable. I hope that what you undid there will not be returned. But you might know this or you might not know it. My home is in Winde. I'm not currently in South Africa. For reasons that are for another discussion. I'm on of course, I still pay my raising taxes. I'm on my neighborhood watch group and all that. Well, there's a parcel land there adjacent to the Winde station. There are people who've inhabited that land. During daylight, they do drugs. They do also activities. They group there, they go to steal, they start there, they come from there. We've watched them over the years. Whenever we write to the city of Cape Town, we get told it's parcel land, we can't do anything. This is nonsense. Surely we can't, my neighbors, and I'm sure it applies to other neighborhoods around the Cape Town. People can't take a casual walk in their neighborhood anymore. I was there in April. I went out riding on my bicycle. I was attacked with guns and knives. They took my bike. I was really scared. Just less than 1,000 meters from my house. A house I could walk around, jog around. So what do you say to these people like us who are paying rates and taxes, but who can't even take a stroll out of their house? Every night, cameras record people, JP Smith. That land of Prasa, something has got to be done about it. The city can't keep saying we can't do anything about it. People are infesting that place with drugs and guns and knives. They run all sorts of attacks on civilians from that space. Surely something has to be done about that.
I've been on site to that particular informal settlement that has sprung up there. And we have done, I can get you the statistics, but we have done hundreds of arrests in that site. Of course, as soon as you arrest one, another drug dealer or criminal element will enter the space or replace the one you've arrested. There is a massive problem with that particular community. When the taxi drivers, when the last walkabout I did with the mayor, we got there and the taxi drivers plead with you to do something. And they're not short of solutions for solving their problems. When the taxi drivers plead with you to deal with somebody and that they're afraid of that group, then you know that you have a serious problem. So in this regard, the challenge is that national government has a piece of legislation called the PI Act, Prevention of Illegal Eviction and Unauthorized Occupation of Land Act. And that act protects people from unlawful eviction. It was originally designed to protect farm workers from arbitrary eviction But because of poor definitions and a lack of detail in the Act, has over time been interpreted by the courts to mean something very different from what the original authors intended. At the moment, it is being applied by national government and enforced through a series of court interdicts by the South African Human Rights Commission, Ndifuna, Kwazi, Reclaim the City, and others, so-called social housing activists, who have obtained a series of interdicts against the city, which have the effect of preventing us from doing any meaningful counter-spoliation. Counter-spoliation is the common law act of preventing the unlawful occupation of the land as stipulated in the Act.
Right.
The problem is that the Act does not define what a home is or when you reside in that reasonably. And over time, the courts have populated that with their interpretation of. Effectively, what that means now is that if I go to a public place anywhere in the city and I pop out a tent and I place the tent on the ground, in that second I do that, it becomes a home. If I lie down on the ground and I pull a piece of plastic over me, the court now deems that to be a home. And those persons may not be removed except through an eviction application and a court order, which will take 6 to 18 months to obtain. And in that time, we have to find alternative accommodation for those persons, which means you have to help them queue jump the 500,000 people who are patiently and legally sitting on the waiting list, waiting for their turn. And the message, of course, sent out as well, this is how you obtain housing. You queue jump, you go and invade a private property, you invade a city building like the Woodstock Hospital, and you occupy these things unlawfully, and then you compel the state to prioritize.
But it's not just the occupation; it's the behavior of those people, the drugs.
Correct, sir.
The
So if that was all, if it was only a homelessness issue, then the impact would have been modest. People would not be up in arms as they are. But the problem is that these structures have been populated by large numbers of parolees, because at the same time that these court orders were taking effect, a simultaneous thing happened due to the lockdown, when the Department of Correctional Services was under pressure because of interdicts obtained against it for overcrowding in the prisons. And in lieu of the lockdown conditions and the COVID pandemic, large numbers of people were released on parole, large numbers. Many of them found their ways into these tented camps. We deal with them every day. They completely changed our urban landscape. Crime in all of our CBDs and business districts where these tents went up spiked. Cape Town CBD became the highest reported crime rate precinct in the entire country. We have now turned that around with the 100 extra officers we've deployed here in the CBD and the fusion, the hub, the command center that we're running jointly with SAPS and the private security and the city center improvement district. But it immediately changed the urban landscape, and communities like Wynberg East specifically, because the informal settlement is on the eastern side of the railway track, have been the subject of constant misery and crime and attacks and house robberies and even aggravated house robberies to the extent that, I mean, I spent a disproportionate amount of time in public meeting. I was in a public meeting in Wynberg a few nights before that operation. I was dying to tell them, don't worry, we're coming to do a big operation, but of course you can't say anything. And so a few nights after that, we did that very comprehensive operation on the occupants of those informal structures, the tents, but also on the slum buildings, because there are two large property owners there who have allowed a very large number of slum buildings to be occupied and their properties to become managed by a syndicate, a man who has adopted for himself the nickname of an erstwhile political leader in this country that he does not deserve, and who runs effective criminal syndicate out of those slum buildings, including one of the buildings that was an old abattoir. It's diabolical to enter the building and see people living in this abattoir, but it's what's happening. So we are now in court to try and seize those buildings in lieu of the outstanding rates in terms of our problem building bylaw, and trying to bring some order to that chaos so that Wynberg can again start resuscitating and seeing and reversing some of the urban decay that is setting.
Yeah, that'll be great. Those people will be happy. I would be happy to see that aid. I don't want to.
You'll be happy also to know that the mayor has given us additional budget for the coming financial year, which will allow us to deploy to both the Voortrekker Road corridor, Bellville, Goodwood, and Parow, which is experiencing the same kind of urban blight, as well as the Wynberg and surrounds, to deploy a very substantial additional policing allocation to each of those two areas as well.
Okay, as we wrap up, JP, I know that you have other things to do. Fadiel Adams of the Cape Congress. This man seems to be accusing you guys of being corrupt and all sorts of other things. I mean, do you know about him? What is your stance on this man and what he stands for?
I'm actually sad by how Fadiel behaves now, because he used to work for an animal welfare organization that I used to work with very closely. I'm very active in the animal welfare space. So I know that at his heart, he must be a good man somewhere. You can't work with animals like that and be an evil person.
Yeah.
But he seems to have lost his compass. I mean, he's now descended into a level of racial nationalism that is deeply problematic, espouses very violent and aggressive and xenophobic attacks, advocated for the lynching of foreign nationals who were accused of a crime in a part of the southern suburbs in Parkwood, were accused of a crime, were lynched by a mob, where it then became clear that they had not been responsible for the crime. And he doubled down. He said, well, regardless of whether they're responsible for the crime, I still support the attacks on them.
Well,
So
I mean, if Malema says stuff that needs to be dealt with, somebody like Fadil must be there. I mean, surely you can't go there, incite violence, and then double down when there's trouble and there are no consequences.
We have made criminal cases against him. The South African Human Rights Commission has cases reported against him. We have the code of conduct violations against him within the city that the Speaker of Council is dealing with. And we have a civil case running against him for a riot that he instigated some years ago on social media, which had a consequence of causing a lot of public damage and damage to people's private vehicles for stoning and the destruction of traffic lights and other public infrastructure. So unfortunately, what we've seen in South Africa is the gradual collapse of the political center. Your DA and ANC, your left and right of center, have suffered a lot from these forces, and what has replaced them is the rise of the political fringe, especially your racial nationalists in parties like the EFF, which has got an unashamed racial nationalist message, for which Malema has now been being sanctioned by the Human Rights Commission, finally, after many previous transgressions for which he received no sanction. The EFF, the Cape Coloured Congress and Patriotic Alliance, which are very similar, strong xenophobic messages, strong nationalist messages. The Freedom Front Plus, which does that, but for white voters. So you've seen the rise of the nationalist parties at the expense of more liberal options, which de-emphasize group rights. And this is a sad thing, but this is not unique to South Africa. This is happening all over the world. You're seeing it in North America. You're seeing it across Europe. You're seeing it elsewhere. You've seen it in South America. You've seen it in India. These are forces that are at play elsewhere in the world, and South Africa is not an island. We're not immune from these things. People watch social media. They have access to the internet. So these forces are manifesting here too. And I think it's sad, but I do think we're at a turning point where we are seeing in the polls people starting to step away from that, people losing faith in that kind of racial mobilization. I hope that is true, because South Africa embarked on a very brave journey in 1994 with the vision of Mandela to be a rainbow nation for all of the people who live here. We have lost our way and gone off the path. We're bundu bashing at the moment through the thickets. I hope that I'm seeing a return, and in 2024, maybe that return manifests to a more sensible set of values where we recognize the common humanity in all of us.
I hope so too. JP, last question. I mean, when you look at what's going on in Tshwane, Kurule, and in Johannesburg, do you say, thank God we have the sufficient numbers here in Cape Town not to be in that space? I mean, or do you look at these guys, some of whom you've mentioned, the names of parties, and say, if we were to work with one of them, would it be Action SA? Would it be, whom would you go to bed into bed with politically in order to keep it stable in Cape Town?
So, I mean, yes, we are very grateful that both at provincial and city level, we have an outright majority, and we do not need to be in a coalition government. Coalition governments are very hard. I was part of this city's coalition government when we were 6 political parties that made up the initial coalition when Helen Cele became mayor. It's extremely difficult, and your opposition run interference through disinformation campaigns and stuff that constantly tries to destabilize that coalition. There's a lot of checkbook politics. We had the rise of the first attempt to insert criminal enterprises into the city through a particular individual at the time, where councillors were literally bought. You didn't have by-elections, you had BUY elections, by-elections, where councillors were bought for 25 grand and swapped their allegiance when the crossovers were still politically possible in legislation. Those were challenging times. We're very grateful that we get to execute a vision of uplifting our city and increasingly creating a bigger gap between the quality of life in Cape Town in terms of access to basic services, free basic water, lower unemployment. On most metrics, the city can show that it is improving or increasing the gap between it and the other metros. We're grateful that we have that opportunity, and we work very hard to try and earn the respect of voters to continue to give us that opportunity. But it is not inconceivable that the next election will force us to look at other coalition options that may emanate from the necessity to establish a coalition at national level. And I think my party leadership would be unimpressed if I ventured opinions about how those coalitions might look. But what is almost certain now is that the ANC are not going to manage enough vote to form a government outright. The issue is, are the coalition partners the sensible centre, or are the coalition partners the EFF?
Okay.
Or the ANC, that is.
I have two last questions. The one is this, and I'll ask them both together. Is there a construction mafia in Cape Town? If yes, what are you guys doing about it? The easy one is there something that I haven't asked you, JP Smith, that you'd like to say to our viewers out there about the work you're doing, something that you probably haven't said? Construction mafia.
Absolutely, there is a construction mafia in Cape Town. There is an extortion mafia, which works on a variety of levels. It's been coming for the last 7-8 years. Initially, it was small. It manifested as so-called community leadership or community organizations asking for local labor. And in part of that, almost as a noble intent, you could see, well, that was local enablement. But it started there. The first pegs were put in the ground with local labor being able to assert itself. Then later on, when local labor was perhaps not important on a project where unskilled labor was not possible, where you would hire that local labor just to prevent your bulldozers from being vandalized. And so where the local labor really couldn't play any role, they were nominally on site, but the work was specialized in terms of operation of heavy earth-moving equipment. And over time, these community organizations have morphed into larger organizations, into more aggressive organizations, whether they call themselves an empowerment organization who goes to a factory and says, you will pay us. Instead of this private security company of now, you are now going to move to this private security company. You're going to give us 60,000 rand a month. And then when that doesn't happen, you abduct the wife of the factory owner. From the syndicate that arrived at one of the big construction sites here in the CBD and said, you don't have serious problems now, but we foresee that you may have all manner of problems. But if you use this security company, then the problem will resolve itself. And then mysteriously, that security company sends a business plan a day later, and all kinds of threatening and intimidatory visits are made to the management in that company, which scares the living daylights out of them. They are not accustomed to these kind of things. It's a very scary space for them, and often they capitulate. So absolutely, the construction mafias that are right. Do you need to have a special
unit? You do need to have a special unit fighting against those?
Yes, we have. Okay. There is an extortion task team that was created with SAPS. It is not effective because effectively our role in that is to sit part of the meeting where statistics are announced and very little operational matters are engaged in. This is part of our pressure on the national minister and national commissioner to create these extortion task teams. But there is a nominal extortion task team. The city has staff that we have set aside to work on these extortion cases. Yesterday, I was alerted to another one. I immediately contacted our Safety and Security Investigations Unit. The head of that unit immediately got staff in touch, and we assist them with making cases. We work with the prosecutors in the Hawks and in SAPS to try and intervene. And in some cases, we've now been able to give relief to these individuals. In some cases, some of the people involved have been arrested. There is a very serious gang figure in Khayelitsha who was driving those mass killings. His arrest has caused the cessation of those things. of those horrible shooting incidents. So there's some progress. There have been some arrests. A great deal more is possible and can be achieved, but that is going to require a switch to be flipped in the minds of some people who occupy positions nationally to think differently of the role of local and provincial government, as would be the case in cities in the US when you go and you see how integrated task teams or task forces work there between all the different stakeholders. You understand what is possible. And then it's very hard to understand why we can't just do the same here.
Yeah. You're parting short to the residents of Cape Town and to our viewers out there, JP.
I think that by and large, people understand that we're trying to do the best we can. We're using the resources we have. We're increasing those resources. We're trying to work smarter. We're stepping into spaces that are not ours, but we're doing it because we see no other way. We're trying very hard to be accountable. We've introduced a computer-aided dispatch system that ensures accountability and transparency. We are trying very hard to make it so that the public have trust in the work we're doing. And I would say if you survey them, by and large, that trust is evident in the surveys and the reaction from the public. We're not infallible. I ask that they forgive the places where we fail. They understand that we're trying and that they partner with us. One of the big determinants of how effective we are is the level of information we get. Some communities have learned to trust us and give us good tip-offs and information. And there we are able to make more meaningful and more rapid impacts on violence and crime. Other communities we've not been able to achieve the same level of tip-off and information being forthcoming. And so my big call would be that the public do that they use our call center, our tip-off line, that they share that information with us. They can do it anonymously. We will protect the identity of the informants so that we can do more for them.
Alderman JP Smith, thank you so much for making the time to be with me here. And I think that the message, everything that you've shared here is so important, both in terms of what you guys are doing in the city of Cape Town and the frustration that you're facing with National. Let's hope that at some point we'll get it. There's some awakening at the top. People will realize that when Cape Town is saved, Johannesburg is saved, Durban is saved, South Africa will be saved. But sometimes we have to do it one city at a time. And you guys are doing a great job from where I'm seeing. From where I'm sitting, and I hope that you keep doing that. You keep fighting those people in my neighborhood. I have to say this, and get PRASA to wake up and just do something about that land and other places.
I don't know what the delay is in your show going out, but I can tell you that there are more operations planned. We're not giving out dates, so it's probably safe to say.
Yeah.
But Wynberg will be the subject of continuous operations now until we have changed those dynamics that are holding those residents hostage.
Thank you very much, JP Smith. I really, really appreciate you and the government of the city of Cape Town. Have a lovely day.
You too, Solly. Go well, sir.
Bye-bye.
Nice to speak to you.
Same here.
Bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it for yourself. Alderman JP Smith is one of the most active politicians in the city of Cape Town. It's up to you to decide what you make of it. I have huge appreciation for him and the frustrations that he's gone through over the years. But if you've come this far in this conversation, it means that you really appreciated it. And I would like you to please continue sharing, liking WorldView, sharing it with your friends and colleagues, associates out there. And for those of you who want to advertise on WorldView, please write to us at worldview.help@gmail.com. This is Solly Wayne at WorldView. Goodbye.